So no matter who you are, there is an element of risk in every decision that we make, every task from birth. And survival is dependent on how well we manage that risk. No matter if you're in the facility or you're at home, there are potential hazards out there that have the possibility to cause harm, and not just harm, have the possibility to kill people. As a leader, your responsibility first and foremost is to manage those hazards with catastrophic potential. And to do that, you must first understand what those hazards are and really understand the risk and the controls that are in place. You can't do that without understanding risk management. You can't do that without prioritizing your risk so you can understand what you need to go after. When you focus on when the leaders of the organization have their firm hand on catastrophic risk, it sends a message. I refuse to kill or seriously injure somebody for production, but glass bottles. If you're a parent and you start first and foremost with those hazards with catastrophic potential at home, it sends that message to your kids. I refuse to let you harm yourself. I'm going to make sure there are controls in place for when you cross the street. I'm not going to allow it. There's some catastrophic risk within my household. I refuse to just look the other way. That's what it's saying when you send that message. But the first question is, how do you do that? How do you evaluate risk? Number one, it starts with hazard. When you talk about a hazard, it's anything with the potential to cause harm. Object plus energy equals hazard. Possibility to cause harm. A forklift or a car by itself is not that bad. But when you put a person in there and he's going 15, 20 miles and he's texting, it becomes an extreme hazard, right? There are many hazards out there and some are inherently catastrophic. Working in heights is a catastrophic activity. Working within a confined space. Traveling through a well-populated area with all type of forklifts. Those are inherently dangerous areas. There are hazards that even with control still have the possibility to cause harm. And you have to understand what those key areas are. Because it's different than ergonomics, where you get a strained back. If you fall from 20 feet, you're never coming back. So that's why you have to have a different intensity about the controls in place to manage those catastrophic risks, right? Now, I talk about risk. What is risk? So when we talk about risk, this is the chance or the possibility that harm can occur. That's what we talk about, the chance or possibility that harm can occur. When you do that, you have to have a thought process and a mindset with going in. So the way that I think about risk, simple. I think how bad, potential severity, and how likely, frequency plus probability. When you put those three things together, severity, probability, and frequency, you can start to understand what your highest risks are. What controls do you have in place? What's still out there? What do I still have to focus on? What should be my focus as a leader within this facility if I want to focus on the most catastrophic risk? But you have to go through that process. Severity, frequency, and probability. And what we do is you get a score. And that score will determine how you go about things, right? Take, for instance, one of the most commonly misunderstood things, specifically when you talk about risk, is probability. Severity, easy. Catastrophic, potentially the hazard has potential to kill somebody, or recordable. It's a scale. But when you talk about probability, you have to start with the controls that are already in place. When you think about probability, you have to evaluate the controls. Probability should be based solely on the controls that are in place, specifically. So I have kind of rating scale. You got certain, no controls in place. There is certain to happen. If there is no controls in place, you've just been lucky, right? There's not anything in place to prevent something from stopping that catastrophic risk. So we just been on borrowed time if there are no controls in place, right? Now going up the hierarchy of controls, probable. This is limited or minimal controls in place. Behavior-based administrative controls. This is check the box. This is the generalized safety awareness training. These are properly distanced visuals, signs that people have to follow and do the right thing every time for those controls to work. And then personal protective equipment. The last line of defense when you talk about the hierarchy of controls. You can't give it anything above a 4 because the controls that are put in place are weaker. It takes an employee doing the right thing each and every time for those controls to work. Scale. Going up, possible. Adequate controls in place. So multiple administrative controls and verification. So for this one, not only do we have a standard operating procedure, but we have a skill verification. And we validate that the people in the facility can actually perform that high-risk task on an annual basis. Think about lockout, tagout program, where you have an extensive computer-based safety training, you have a hands-on verification, and you make sure on an annual basis they can actually isolate that asset. You have levels. It's just not a check-the-box ergonomics awareness training. You have that skill verification. You have that extra bit of validation that makes that control solid. Removable guards, prohibited tasks. So the prohibited tasks for specialists and contractors only that do that work on a frequent basis. And then things like two-hand devices that don't allow access to the hazard area. But you kind of get the feel where you have adequate controls in place where that can still be an issue, but we've done the due diligence where we go above just the stamp, just the generalized awareness. It's more than just an administrative control that we just check the box. We validate and make sure people are actually doing what they're supposed to do. And then the last one, fixed guarding, interlock, strong controls in place, engineering controls, elimination, substitution. That's where you get when you look at unlikely. And that's where we want to be. You want to push and you want to strive for engineering controls. You want to strive for elimination. You want to strive for substitution. But to do that, to understand probability, you have to first evaluate the controls. That's where it starts at. That's where you have to start when you go to evaluating risk, right? Now, severity. What's the most credible scenario when we talk about severity? And it's a scale where you have most catastrophic up top. You got a 9. This death or permanent disability. That person will never be the same. Going down, you have lost time, days away from work, restricted. You would think deeper than just a recordable injury, these people are off for a time period. 3, you got a 3 rating for recordable. So this is medical treatment beyond first aid, recordable injury, and the last one for first aid. What I like to do when I think about risk, I like to start with the worst case scenario, and I like to understand the most common scenario. So like, for instance, lockout, tagout. The highest risk will probably be that catastrophic, right? Most likely, probably lost time. Most likely, probably recordable when you think about injuries within the facility. What you would do is pick something in between. But you have to evaluate what's worst case, what's most likely, and try to pick something in between to where it's not every situation, every hazard is just the worst case scenario. We taking into account for past injuries that have happened, and you kind of use your mental for that one. And then the last one, plain and simple, frequency. How much are you exposed to this hazard? Is it 6 or more times per shift? You get a 4. Is it 1 to 5 times per shift? You get a 2. Is it less than weekly? You get a 1. But that's the scale. That's a basic scale that you can use severity, frequency, and probability when you're evaluating risk. The two easier ones are severity and frequency. You know, regardless of what we put in place, working at heights is inherently hazardous. So working at heights is going to be potentially catastrophic. Working 20 to 30 feet high is going to be a catastrophic risk. What we can do is affect the probability by putting in particular controls, but you still have that risk. That risk is still ever present. And you can lower frequency by shortening the number of times they're exposed to the task, right? Now, this is a simple tool that I use to communicate, and that not only communicate to my leadership team, but to circle back and communicate to the rest of the facility about key risks. But it starts with leaders having a laser focus on hazards with catastrophic potential. Because you don't look at it, it sets the tone for the facility. It sets the tone for the facility when you have the people in leadership positions that understand the catastrophic risk in the facility and take them seriously. And not only know them, but have a GPS coordinates on what controls are in place and what validations are in place to make sure that those controls are actually lowering risk. That has to be where you start as a leader. So thank me later and evaluate your risk.